Listen carefully because what I am about to tell you is not a hypothetical. This is not a war game. This is not a simulation run at a naval war college. What is happening right now in real time in the waters of the Persian Gulf and the skies above the Arabian Peninsula is the kind of multi-front coordinated escalation that military planners have feared for decades. Iran has launched a sneak attack simultaneously against the United Arab Emirates, against Kuwait, against commercial shipping near Qatar, and possibly against positions in Iraq. And at the same time, they have flooded the Strait of Hormuz with submarines, small, lethal, nearly impossible to track. Submarines designed for one purpose and one purpose only, to shut down the most critical maritime choke point on the face of this earth. I want you to understand something before we go any further. In every conflict I have studied, in every operation I have planned, in every mission I have executed, the most dangerous moment is not when the enemy is strong. The most dangerous moment is when the enemy is cornered, when they are desperate, when they believe they have nothing left to lose. That is when they stop fighting strategically. That is when they start fighting emotionally. And an enemy fighting from emotion, from rage, from ideology, from fanaticism, is the most unpredictable adversary you will ever face. What you are witnessing today is exactly that. And if you think this morning's attacks were the worst of it, you have not been paying close enough attention to what is building beneath the surface. Let me lay this out for you with the precision it deserves. On the morning of May 10th, 2026, the Ministry of Defense of the United Arab Emirates confirmed that its air defense systems successfully intercepted two unmanned aerial vehicles launched directly from Iranian territory. 2 drones this morning alone. But here is the number that should stop you cold. Since the onset of this conflict, UAE air defenses have engaged 551 ballistic missiles, 29 cruise missiles, and more than 2,000 drones. 2,000 drones. That is not harassment. That is not provocation. That is a sustained, relentless, industrial-scale campaign of aerial bombardment against a neighboring nation. The Emiratis have absorbed blow after blow after blow, and their defenses have held. But every defensive system has limits. Every intercept costs resources. Every successful defense is also a warning that eventually the math changes. Kuwait faced the same assault this morning. Brigadier General Assad Abdul al-Otaibi, spokesperson for the Kuwaiti Ministry of Defense, confirmed that at dawn on May 10th, armed forces detected multiple hostile drones entering Kuwaiti airspace. They were engaged and neutralized in accordance with established protocols. The Kuwaiti military affirmed their full readiness. Those are the right words to say publicly. But behind closed doors, every military commander in the Gulf right now is asking the same question. How long can we keep absorbing this? How long before one missile, one drone, one cruise weapon finds a gap? And here is where it gets worse. While the air defenses in the UAE and Kuwait were holding, a bulk carrier, a massive commercial cargo vessel operating near Qatar, was struck and set on fire. Iran hit it, directly, deliberately. That ship was not a military target. That ship was commerce. That ship was the global economy moving through one of the most critical waterways in the world, and it is now burning. Iran has continued to fire on every commercial vessel attempting to transit the Strait of Hormuz. They have fired on United States Navy ships, and let me be absolutely clear. The United States Navy responded with devastating precision airstrikes along the Iranian coastline. But for every response, Iran has escalated. For every strike, they have broadened their target set. That is the pattern of an adversary who is not looking for off-ramps. That is the pattern of an adversary who believes that escalation is the only leverage they have left. Now I want to talk to you about the submarines, because this is the development that, in my assessment, represents the most significant tactical shift we have seen in this conflict. Iran has deployed what are known as Ghadir-class submarines into the Strait of Hormuz. These are not the large, sophisticated fleet submarines you might imagine. They are small. They are fast for their class. They carry torpedoes. Some configurations carry cruise missiles. They are crewed by a handful of sailors who have been trained specifically to operate in the shallow, confined, chaotic waters of the Strait of Hormuz. And that is what makes them so extraordinarily dangerous. Here's what you need to understand about the Strait of Hormuz. At its narrowest point, it is only about 21 miles wide, but the navigable shipping channel, the lane where supertankers and cargo vessels and naval vessels must transit, is far narrower than that. It is a bottleneck. It is a kill zone if your adversary controls enough of the water space beneath the surface. The United States Navy has destroyed much of Iran's larger surface fleet. We have struck their big submarines. We have degraded their coastal missile batteries. But these Ghadir submarines, they were built for exactly this scenario. They were built to survive the destruction of everything else around them and still fight. They were built to hide in the shallow water under layers of thermoclines and acoustic clutter and wait. And now they are in the strait. Now they are hunting. Let me tell you something about fighting an enemy in confined, shallow waters. I have worked with the finest submarine commanders this Navy has ever produced. I have sat in rooms where the most sophisticated anti-submarine warfare in human history was being planned and executed. And every one of those commanders will tell you the same thing. Hunting a small submarine in shallow water is one of the hardest tactical problems in modern warfare. The Ghadir class is small enough to hug the bottom. It is noisy, yes, but in the acoustic chaos of a busy strait filled with burning tankers and naval operations, noise signature discrimination becomes enormously difficult. These submarines are a problem, a serious, immediate, and lethal problem. At the same time, satellite imagery has confirmed what many already suspected. Iranian tankers that were disabled by United States forces in the strait remain on fire and leaking oil. The strait itself is becoming a hazardous environment. You have burning hulks, you have oil slicks, you have naval vessels maneuvering in tight spaces, you have hidden submarines below the surface, you have drones above, you have missile batteries along the Iranian coastline still capable of firing. And somewhere in all of that chaos, global commerce, the oil that heats homes and powers economies across the planet, is trying to find a way through. 20% of the world's oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. 20%. If that flow stops, not partially slows, but stops, the economic consequences will be felt within weeks on every continent on Earth. And what comes next will challenge everything you think you know about how this conflict ends. I want to talk to you now about the strategic picture, because tactical events, as important as they are, do not exist in a vacuum. They are expressions of a deeper strategic reality. And the strategic reality right now is this. Iran has submitted its counterproposal to a United States peace initiative. The proposal was transmitted through Pakistan, which has been serving as a diplomatic back channel. And Iran's position is as follows. They are willing to negotiate one thing and one thing only, ending the war. They will not negotiate their uranium enrichment program. They will not negotiate their ballistic missile capability. They will not negotiate their support for proxy forces across the region. They will not put any of that on the table. Their position is simple. Take it or leave it. Stop shooting, and we stop shooting. Now, if you have any experience in international negotiations, any understanding at all of how strategic bargaining works, you recognize immediately what that position represents. It is not a peace offer. It is a stall. It is Iran saying, we need time. We need to reconsolidate. We need to rearm. We need to reassert control over our internal situation. Because the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, is now in complete, unchallenged control of Iran's military and political apparatus. And the IRGC does not think in terms of compromise. The IRGC does not think in terms of diplomatic solutions. The IRGC thinks in terms of survival, ideology, and eventual dominance. The most radical, the most fanatical, the most fundamentalist elements of the Iranian government are now calling every shot. And while their diplomat was transmitting a peace proposal through Pakistan, the commander of the IRGC Aerospace Force was publicly announcing that his missiles and drones are locked onto enemy targets and awaiting only the order to fire. Read that again. Awaiting only the order to fire. That is not the language of a government seeking peace. That is the language of a government that has decided peace is theater and war is the only reality that matters. That is the language I have heard before, in different tongues, in different theaters, from different adversaries, and it always ends the same way. Someone pulls the trigger, and then everything changes. I want you to hold on to that thought, because before we get to what that means, before we get to how the United States and its Arab allies must respond, and what the consequences of getting this wrong will be, I have to tell you about something that came out of Iraq this morning. Something that sounds like it belongs in a Tom Clancy novel. Something that tells you more about the real architecture of this conflict than any press release or diplomatic cable ever could. According to a report in the Wall Street Journal, citing United States officials, Israel established a secret forward operating position in the western desert of Iraq, a clandestine outpost, built without Iraqi government knowledge or approval, built in the run-up to the conflict with Iran. The United States was aware of the installation. The purpose was to support Israeli operations against Iran, including positioning assets for combat search and rescue operations if an Israeli pilot were shot down during strikes on Iranian territory. Here is where it gets extraordinary. An Iraqi shepherd walking his flock through the western desert stumbled across this installation. He reported it. Iraqi military forces moved to investigate. And Israel, in order to protect the secrecy of a covert forward base on the sovereign territory of a nation it is nominally at peace with, launched airstrikes to force the Iraqi forces back. One Iraqi soldier was killed. Sit with that for a moment. Israel built a secret airbase in Iraq. A shepherd found it. Israel launched airstrikes to protect it. One Iraqi soldier died. That is the level of operational complexity, of moral weight, of geopolitical consequence that this conflict has reached. Every nation in the region is now entangled. Every military is making calculations. Every government is managing a situation that is simultaneously a shooting war, a proxy conflict, a diplomatic chess match, and a test of whether the existing international order in the Middle East can hold under the pressure of what is coming. And what is coming, if you think what we have seen this morning is the peak of this crisis, is something for which most people are wholly unprepared. Because what Iran launched this morning was not desperation. It was capability demonstration. It was a signal. And the question that every military commander, every intelligence analyst, every policymaker in Washington and Riyadh and Abu Dhabi and Jerusalem is asking right now is, if this is what Iran does when they are losing, what are they capable of when they decide they have nothing left to lose? There is a principle I have carried with me through every command I have ever held, from the earliest days of Bud's training to the corridors of the Pentagon to the command of the most elite special operations forces this nation has ever assembled. That principle is this: the enemy always gets a vote. No matter how well you plan, no matter how superior your technology, no matter how precise your intelligence, the enemy gets a vote. And right now, Iran is voting loudly, simultaneously, on multiple fronts. And the world needs to understand exactly what that vote means and what must happen next. Let us start with the explosions inside Iran itself, because while Tehran was launching drones at Kuwait and the UAE, while their submarines were slipping beneath the surface of the Strait of Hormuz, while their diplomats were transmitting peace proposals through Pakistan, something was detonating inside Iranian borders. Loud explosions in the port city of Chabahar, situated on the Gulf of Oman. Multiple blasts confirmed, cause unknown. And simultaneously, in Bandar Abbas, the very city that United States forces struck just days ago in direct retaliation for Iranian missile attacks on U.S. Navy vessels, explosions again. Early morning, loud enough to rattle windows, significant enough to be reported by Iranian state-affiliated media itself. Now, I am not going to tell you who is responsible for those explosions. I am not in a position to make that assessment with certainty, and neither are you. But I will tell you this, in warfare, explosions inside your adversary's territory that cannot be immediately attributed to any single actor are never random. Nothing at this level of conflict is random. These are either the result of continued U.S. air operations, Israeli covert action, internal Iranian resistance, or some combination of all three. What they tell us, without question, is that Iran's internal security situation is not stable. The IRGC may be in control of the government. They may have consolidated political power. But consolidating political power and controlling the physical security of your nation's most strategic infrastructure are two entirely different problems. And Iran appears to be losing ground on the second one, even as it tightens its grip on the first. This matters enormously for how we think about the next phase of this conflict. Because a government that is absorbing strikes on its naval infrastructure, losing surface ships, seeing its submarines hunted, watching its drone and missile inventory being drawn down by the hundreds, and simultaneously experiencing unexplained explosions inside its own borders, is a government under total pressure. And governments under total pressure make one of two choices. They negotiate from reality, or they escalate from ideology. Iran's leadership, now dominated by the most hardline faction within the IRGC, has made its choice clear. They are not negotiating from reality. They are escalating from ideology. And that tells every serious military and strategic thinker exactly where this is heading if no one finds a way to change the calculus. I want to speak directly to something that matters deeply to me and should matter to every American watching this unfold. We have service members in that region right now, men and women on ships, on aircraft, in command centers, in positions throughout the Middle East. They are operating under extraordinary pressure with extraordinary professionalism. The footage released by U.S. Central Command, F-18 Super Hornets refueling at altitude, fully loaded with weapons, ready to respond within minutes, is not just imagery. That is a statement of will. That is the United States military saying to the world, we are here, we are ready, and we will respond to any threat with decisive force. And they have done exactly that. Every time Iran has struck at U.S. Navy assets, the response has been immediate, precise, and devastating to Iranian military capability. But there is a reality that no amount of military superiority can fully neutralize, and it is this: you cannot bomb your way to a diplomatic solution. Military force creates conditions. Military force changes calculations. Military force imposes cost that eventually, if applied with sufficient precision and persistence, compel an adversary to reconsider their options. But military force alone does not end wars. Wars end when one or both sides conclude that continuing to fight costs more than whatever they hope to gain by fighting in the first place. And right now, Iran's leadership, the IRGC hardliners who have seized total control, have not yet reached that conclusion. They believe, or at least they are acting as though they believe, that continued escalation serves their interests, that every ship they sink, every drone they launch, every missile they fire proves to their domestic audience, to their regional proxies, and to the world that they are unbowed. That is a dangerous delusion. But dangerous delusions held by armed, fanatical men with missiles and submarines and the willingness to use them are not academic problems. They are operational realities, and they must be met with operational solutions. So let me tell you what the United States and its Arab allies must do, not as a pundit, not as a commentator, as someone who has spent a career thinking about exactly these kinds of problems. How do you defeat an adversary that is simultaneously military, ideological, economic, and political? How do you apply enough pressure to force a genuine change in behavior without triggering the catastrophic escalation that makes everything worse. The first imperative is the Strait of Hormuz. Those Gadir submarines must be neutralized, every one of them. This is not optional. This is not a matter of strategic patience. Every hour those submarines remain active in the strait, every merchant vessel that attempts to transit is at risk of being struck by a torpedo or a cruise missile fired from beneath the surface of water that is simultaneously a battlefield and the jugular vein of the global energy economy. The United States Navy has the tools to hunt those submarines. It is dangerous, painstaking, extraordinarily difficult work in those shallow waters, but it must be done. The strait must be cleared. And the international community, every nation that depends on the free flow of energy through that choke point, must understand that their economic survival is directly tied to the success of that mission. This is not America's problem alone. This is the world's problem, and it demands a coalition response, not just a unilateral one. The second imperative is the aerial threat architecture. Iran has demonstrated over the course of this conflict an extraordinary capacity to regenerate drone and missile production and deployment. They have launched more than 2,000 drones at the UAE alone. That is an industrial scale capability. And while Gulf air defenses have performed remarkably well, the math of attrition eventually favors the attacker if the defender cannot eliminate the production and launch infrastructure. That means continued, sustained, precise strikes against the facilities where these systems are built, stored, and prepared for launch. It means targeting the supply chains. It means denying Iran the components, many of which flowed through third country networks in violation of international sanctions that allow them to keep producing weapons at scale. This is intelligence work as much as it is military work, and it requires coordination among allies that must be tighter and more sustained than anything we have achieved so far. The third imperative, and this is the one that will determine whether this conflict becomes a contained regional war or something far larger and far more destructive, is Iraq. What Israel did in the western desert of Iraq is, whatever the operational justification, a strategic problem of the first order. Iraq is not a unified actor. It is a fractured state with a sinful government, multiple armed militias with direct ties to Iran, Kurdish forces with their own interests, and a population that has spent the last 2 decades watching foreign powers conduct operations on its sovereign territory. The revelation that Israel built a secret air base in Iraqi territory and then used airstrikes to protect it from Iraqi military forces, killing an Iraqi soldier in the process, is the kind of incident that can radicalize populations, destabilize governments, and hand Iran exactly the narrative it needs to recruit, to consolidate, and to expand the battlefield in ways that would make everything we are dealing with today look manageable by comparison. The United States must engage Iraq at the highest diplomatic level immediately. Not to apologize for Israel's operational decisions, that is not America's role, and it is not America's burden. But to make absolutely clear to Baghdad that the United States respects Iraqi sovereignty, that we understand the complexity of their internal political situation, and that we are committed to working with the Iraqi government to ensure that their territory does not become the staging ground for a broader regional conflict. This is the kind of diplomatic work that rarely makes headlines. It is not dramatic. It does not generate the kind of imagery that plays on a news broadcast. But it is the work that determines whether this crisis widens or narrows. And it must be done with urgency, with skill, and with the full weight of American diplomatic credibility behind it. Now, I want to come back to the IRGC because I do not think the world fully grasps what it means that they are now in complete and total control of Iran. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was founded for one purpose: to protect the revolution. Not the Iranian state, not the Iranian people, the revolution, the ideology, the theological political system constructed by Ayatollah Khomeini in 1979 and defended, often violently, ever since. The IRGC has its own army, its own navy, its own air force, its own intelligence services, its own economic empire worth hundreds of billions of dollars, and its own vision for Iran's role in the region and the world. And that vision is not one of coexistence. It is one of dominance, achieved through proxies, through missiles, through nuclear ambiguity, and through the willingness to absorb punishment that would cause any other government to sue for peace. When the commander of the IRGC Aerospace Force announces publicly that his missiles and drones are locked and awaiting only the order to fire, simultaneous to a diplomatic peace proposal being transmitted to the United States, what you are witnessing is not contradiction. It is strategy. The IRGC wants America to believe two things at once: that Iran is open to negotiation and that Iran is prepared to escalate beyond anything yet seen. They want to create uncertainty. They want to slow American decision-making. They want to give their forces time to reposition, to resupply, to reconsolidate. The peace proposal is not a peace proposal. It is a tactical pause dressed up in diplomatic language. And the United States must not be fooled by it. But, and this is the hardest thing I will say to you today, and it is the truth whether it is comfortable or not being fooled by Iran's negotiating tactics does not mean rejecting negotiation entirely. It means negotiating from strength, with clarity, with non-negotiable conditions, and with zero illusion about who you are dealing with. The goal cannot be to punish Iran indefinitely. The goal must be to change Iran's strategic calculus, to make the cost of continued aggression so undeniably high and the potential benefits of genuine engagement so tangibly real that even the IRGC hardliners begin to question whether the path they are on leads anywhere except ruin. That is a military task, that is a diplomatic task, that is an economic task, and it requires a level of sustained, coordinated strategic patience that is genuinely difficult to maintain in an era of 24-hour news cycles and political pressure from every direction. There is a principle I have carried with me through every command I have ever held, from the earliest days of BUDS training to the corridors of the Pentagon to the command of the most elite special operations forces this nation has ever assembled. That principle is this: the enemy always gets a vote. No matter how well you plan, no matter how superior your technology, no matter how precise your intelligence, the enemy gets a vote. And right now, Iran is voting loudly, simultaneously, on multiple fronts. And the world needs to understand exactly what that vote means and what must happen next. Let us start with the explosions inside Iran itself, because while Tehran was launching drones at Kuwait and the UAE, while their submarines were slipping beneath the surface of the Strait of Hormuz, while their diplomats were transmitting peace proposals through Pakistan, something was detonating inside Iranian borders. Loud explosions in the port city of Chabahar, situated on the Gulf of Oman. Multiple blasts confirmed, cause unknown. And simultaneously, in Bandar Abbas, the very city that United States forces struck just days ago in direct retaliation for Iranian missile attacks on U.S. Navy vessels, explosions again, early morning, loud enough to rattle windows, significant enough to be reported by Iranian state-affiliated media itself.